Thank you for watching Amit Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. No ceasefire deal in Gaza. Israel take the control of Rafah borders. Stormy Daniels take the stand in hush money trial of Donald Trump. Basketballist star Brittany Griner life in Russian prison. TikTok sued against the law. Ukraine security foiled the assassination plot of Zelensky. Putin sworn in as a fifth president term. American soldier arrested in Russia went to Russia without permission of US Army. British cable system was hacked. More than 250,000 personnel affected. China is the suspect. 5-story building collapse in South Africa. Classified documents trial of Mr. Trump has been delayed indefinitely. Report on FDIC. Scouting America is the new name for Boy Scouts of America. On Wall Street, Dow Jones Industries rise, Nasdaq down, and S&P 500 rise. Now the news in detail.
Good evening, I'm Amna Navaz. Jeff Bennett is on assignment. On the NewsHour tonight, Israel seizes control of a Gaza border crossing as a ceasefire and hostage deal hangs in the balance. Adult film star Stormy Daniels takes the stand in the hush money trial of former President Donald Trump. And basketball star Brittany Griner talks about her release from Russian prison and readjusting to life back in the United States.
Once I'm on the soil and we pulled up to that hangar and I saw my wife and I saw that U.S. flag hanging in that hangar, then I finally could relax.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
These are people who are trying to change the world. Startups have this energy that energizes me. I'm thriving by helping others every day. People who know BDO.
The ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including... Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Delegations from Israel and Hamas returned to Cairo today to resume fraught negotiations over a potential ceasefire and hostage deal. In the meantime, Israeli tanks and troops seized the Rafah border crossing with Egypt, delaying aid shipments as 1.2 million Palestinians shelter in the city. Following it all is our Nick Schifrin reporting tonight from Jacksonville, North Carolina. So Nick, let's begin in Rafah. Tell us what kind of operation Israel has launched there and why.
Well, as you just said, Israel seized the border crossing that separates Gaza from Egypt. Israel called it a, quote, precise operation to tackle some of the smuggling that goes from Egypt into Gaza, as well as the Hamas militants who operate there. This is actually the first time that Israeli troops have controlled that border crossing since 2005, when Israel withdrew settlers and soldiers from Gaza back then. And in this war, Israel has long argued that it needs to enter nearby Rafah city. And today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said deal Israel will, quote, go deeper into Rafah.
This is Nick Schifrin reporting tonight from Jacksonville, North Carolina. Nick, thank you. In the day's other headlines, TikTok sued to overturn a new law that could ban the video sharing platform inside the U.S. The statute says that TikTok has to end American operations unless its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, sells it within 9 months. The lawsuit says that mandate is, quote, simply not possible, not commercially, not technologically, not legally, and that it violates the First Amendment. In Ukraine, the State Security Service says it foiled a Russian plot to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky and others. Investigators arrested 2 colonels in the Guard unit that protects high-ranking Ukrainian figures. Investigators say they plan to kidnap and kill Zelensky before Russian President Vladimir Putin's inauguration. That inauguration took place today as Putin was sworn in for his 5th term after almost 25 years in office. At an elaborate Kremlin ceremony, Putin vowed to defend the Russian constitution. He said he was open to working with the West despite bitter divisions over Russia's war in Ukraine.
We have been and will be open to strengthening good relations with all countries who see Russia as a reliable and honest partner, and this really is the global majority. We do not reject dialogue with Western states. The choice is theirs.
Putin now begins a 6-year term that will keep him in office through 2030, when he will be eligible to run again. It turns out a U.S. Army soldier arrested in Russia last week was not authorized to be there. The Army says that Staff Sergeant Gordon Black was on leave and was supposed to be returning to Texas. Instead, he flew from South Korea through China to Vladivostok, but Pentagon officials say he never got permission.
Official or any leave to Russia is strictly prohibited, and that's pursuant to the DoD Foreign Clearance Guide, which of course is also informed by State Department guidelines, which right now I believe that is at it's Category 4, which is do not travel to Russia.
Russian officials say Black went to Russia to see a girlfriend, but the couple argued, and he was arrested for stealing money from her. Separately, Moscow's court system says a U.S. civilian is being held there after he was spotted in public, drunk with no clothes on. Officials in London say the British military's payroll system was hacked, exposing names, banking details, and even home addresses. As many as 272,000 soldiers, sailors, and Air Force members were affected, both current and former. Reports swirled today that China was involved, but British officials would not confirm that publicly. Rescuers in South Africa worked today to free 11 people trapped under a collapsed building. The 5-story apartment complex in the city of George was under construction when it gave way on Monday. 6 workers were confirmed dead. Crews have been combing through the wreckage, searching for bodies and survivors. Nearly 40 people are still unaccounted for. Here at home, a federal judge in Florida has indefinitely delayed former President Trump's classified documents trial. Judge Aileen Cannon, a Trump appointee, canceled the trial date of May 20th, but she gave no new date, saying, and she has yet to rule on several key legal issues. Mr. Trump has pleaded not guilty to 40 federal counts. A tornado ripped through a small Oklahoma town last night, killing at least 1 person. It happened in Barnsdall, north of Tulsa. The town had already been hit by an earlier tornado last month. This time, the damage was far worse. Debris littered lot after lot where homes once stood. The mayor said the crews are still sifting through the wreckage.
We've got drones, we've got dogs, we've got infrared stuff. We're going through the debris very thoroughly. All the search and rescue teams are going through with a fine-tooth comb because nobody wants to miss anything.
The National Weather Service had reports of 16 other tornadoes across a swath of neighboring states. A scathing new independent report has found rampant sexual harassment, racial bias, and other misconduct at the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, or FDIC. The report said that leaders at the banking regulator, including its chair, Martin Gruenberg, ignored the problems and that those who complained faced retaliation. Gruenberg called the findings sobering and pledged to make changes. After more than a century, the Boy Scouts of America will change its name to simply Scouting America. The rebrand reflects the organization's shift towards inclusivity, namely allowing girls to join the ranks. In an interview, President and CEO Roger Crone said, quote, "In the next 100 years, we want any youth in America to feel very, very welcome to come into our programs." And on Wall Street, stocks mostly drifted in lackluster trading today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 32 points to close at 38,884. The Nasdaq fell 16 points, and the S&P 500 added 7. Still to come, on the News Hour, President Biden denounces the rise in anti-Semitism in a speech marking Holocaust Remembrance Day. A look at whether campus protests against the war in Gaza qualify as civil disobedience. And Anita Hill on the overturning of Harvey Weinstein's rape conviction and what it means for the Me Too movement.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington.
Stormy Daniels, the adult film actress at the center of the criminal hush money trial against former President Donald Trump, took the stand in New York City today. William Brangham has more on the volatile day in court.
That's right. In sometimes graphic detail, Stormy Daniels described the one sexual encounter she alleges she had with Trump and the...
Tonight, breaking news face-to-face in court. Stormy Daniels takes the stand across from former President Trump. What she reveals. Also, the new tornado threat right now across several states, the deadly outbreak already, including an EF4, and the home explosion, a husband and wife killed. First tonight, the testimony from Stormy Daniels, the adult film star at the center of the criminal trial against Donald Trump, describing their alleged encounter, the heated cross-examination by Trump's lawyer, what the judge said when Trump's team called for a mistrial in the middle of testimony. Also breaking as we come on the air tonight, we have just learned the Florida judge indefinitely postponing former President Trump's classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago. Is there any chance now this happens before the election? These new tornado watches as we come on the air tonight, the severe storm threat from Chicago to Nashville.
Large tornado on the ground.
At least 20 reported tornadoes already in 7 states. Here you go. I got it. Hotel guests and employees running for cover. Dozens of homes destroyed. The widespread storm threat right now, tonight into tomorrow. Ginger Z standing by with the latest forecast. Tonight, Israeli tanks rolling into Rafah. Sources telling ABC News the Biden administration is now delaying shipments of ammunition to Israel, with tense ceasefire talks underway right now in Cairo. Meanwhile, here in the U.S., President Biden tonight condemning the surge of anti-Semitism in the U.S. during a Holocaust remembrance ceremony. Late today in New York City, the deadly shooting, a 16-year-old shot and killed in Soho, outside a high-end hotel. The video now surfacing tonight after we learned that U.S. soldier is now being held in a Russian prison. What he says on that video. The scare on board a Delta flight from Cancun flying to the U.S., the landing, the crew then noticing smoke, the emergency evacuation. That massive home explosion, the husband and wife killed, authorities on the scene tonight. The big change at Panera, the drink they will phase out amid several lawsuits now. The Boy Scouts changing its name. And 2 best friends, and now their next challenge. We guarantee you'll be rooting for them. We are.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David York.
Good evening, and we begin tonight here with breaking news on 2 fronts. Reports of multiple tornadoes on the ground, a tornado emergency alert in parts of Michigan right now. Ginger Z is tracking this. We'll go live to her in just a moment. But first, the dramatic moments inside a New York City courtroom today. Stormy Daniels, the adult film star at the center of the case, taking the stand in former President Trump's criminal trial. Testifying for nearly 4 hours, the former president sitting in his chair as Daniels entered the courtroom, the first time they had seen each other in a decade. Daniels describing in graphic detail meeting Trump at a golf tournament in 2006 and the evening they allegedly spent together. Trump's lawyers trying to intervene several times. Daniels also describing the payment she took for her silence and what the judge said when Trump's team called for a mistrial right in the middle of testimony. Stormy Daniels, as you can see right there, was quickly led from the courthouse afterwards. She returns to the stand on Thursday. There were times in that courtroom today when the level of detail was quite graphic. We will not be going that far right here tonight. Here's our senior investigative correspondent, Aaron Petersky, leading us off at the courthouse.
Tonight, Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels face-to-face for the first time in more than a decade. An explosive day of salacious testimony in this historic trial. Up to the last minute, Trump's lawyers tried to block the porn star from testifying at all, but prosecutors argued the details of the encounter are important, and Judge Juan Merchan agreed. So with the former president staring straight ahead and the jury watching intently, Daniels described in explicit detail her alleged fling with Trump, something he says never happened. She told the jury they met at a golf tournament back in 2006, and she was invited to have dinner with Trump in his hotel suite. When she arrived, she said Trump was in silk or satin pajamas. I told him to go change, she said, and so he obliged, very politely. She said they talked for 2 hours. He told her she reminded him of his daughter Ivanka, and revealed he and and Melania Trump slept in separate bedrooms. Daniels said at one point she told him to stop interrupting, saying, "Are you always this rude? Are you always this arrogant and pompous?" At one point she said she went to the bathroom, and when she came out, she testified Trump was on the bed in his boxer shorts and t-shirt. Daniels said she was startled, wondering to herself, "Oh my God, what did I misread?" She then testified in graphic detail about having sex with Trump, and as she did, Trump nudging his lawyer, repeatedly urging her to intervene, and she did, strongly objecting again and again. Even Judge Merchan at one point calling the level of detail just unnecessary, later adding, "There are some things that would have been better left unsaid." Trump and his team infuriated, demanding a mistrial, his attorney declaring Daniels' testimony extraordinarily prejudicial, but the judge saying, "I don't think we are at the point where a mistrial is in order." On the witness stand, Daniels also described the hush money arrangement she entered into just weeks before the 2016 election, selling her story for $130,000 in a deal brokered by Trump's former fixer Michael Cohen.
Morning, Michael.
She described the payoff as the best thing that could have happened, because then I'd be safe and the story wouldn't come out. The prosecutor asked Daniels why she didn't ask for more money. "Because I didn't care about the money," she replied. But on cross-examination, Trump's lawyer Susan Neckles tore into that claim. "You've been making money by claiming you had sex with Donald Trump for more than a decade," she asked Daniels. "I have been making money by telling my story," Daniels responded. Neckles pressed on. "And the essence of your story is you had sex with President Trump, and that story has made you a lot of money." "It has also cost me a lot of money," said Daniels. The defense attorney, Blunt, "Am I correct that you hate President Trump?" "Yes," Daniels responded. "And you want him to go to jail?" "I want him to be held accountable." When the day was done, Stormy Daniels was quickly taken from the courthouse, Donald Trump coming out to address reporters.
So this was a very big day, a very revealing day. As you see, the case is totally falling apart.
Leaving court, Trump did not mention Stormy Daniels at all. He is under a gag order that prevents him from attacking witnesses. The defense objected to her explicit testimony, but the judge said it was no grounds for a mistrial, and prosecutors argued her graphic descriptions were relevant because they're the very details they said that Trump wanted to hide from voters in 2016, and Trump still denies any of it ever happened. David?
Aaron Katursky leading us off here tonight. Aaron, thank you. And meanwhile, there's another breaking headline involving the former president tonight. The judge overseeing Donald Trump's classified documents case at Mar-a-Lago has now indefinitely postponed that trial. Is there any chance this now happens before Election Day? Let's get right to our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas, live in Washington. Pierre, what have you learned?
David, the likelihood there will be a trial in the classified documents case before the election is fading fast. Judge Eileen Cannon has officially taken a May 20th trial date off the calendar, saying there were too many pretrial motions and legal issues to resolve before trial could go forward. Some of the issues have sat for months, and some are not even scheduled for hearings until later this month or June. The special counsel tonight declined to comment, but David, this delay makes it all but certain the classified documents case will not go to trial before the election.
Pierre Thomas with us tonight as well. Pierre, thank you. And as I mentioned off the top tonight, there are reports of multiple tornadoes on the ground as we're on the air tonight. A tornado emergency alert in parts of Michigan right now. Severe weather ahead for 35 million Americans. Already at least 20 reported tornadoes across 7 states in just the past 24 hours. This new storm threat tonight and tomorrow from Texas to Ohio. A tornado approaching a Hampton Inn in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, knocking out power. Hotel guests and workers running for cover there. The utter devastation some 20 miles away in Barnsdall, Oklahoma, EF4. Winds over 165 miles an hour. We have learned tonight at least one person did not survive this. Again, as I mentioned, reports of tornadoes on the ground right now. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z. She's in the storm zone. And Ginger, what are you watching right now?
David, 2 particularly dangerous situation tornado warnings in my home state of Michigan. It's southwest Michigan, where these storms have been screaming to the northeast, doing damage along the way. This as we learn more about the EF4 that tore through this town.
Tonight, powerful storms threatening millions again after at least 20 reported tornadoes across the plains in the last 24 hours.
Are you okay?
At least one person killed in Barnsdall, Oklahoma, north of Tulsa. Storm chasers were right there, rescuing Ryan and Lori Howell, their young child, and a family member.
We could cover the hall, throw blankets over us, and I could hear the windows blow.
20 miles northeast in Bartlesville. People diving for cover at the Hampton Inn. Outside, 2x4s piercing the hotel's outer walls like spears. Daylight revealing destruction everywhere. We met Billy Moles as he was searching for his medicine.
Both my vehicles are destroyed. My house is gone. All paperwork. I haven't found any of that.
About a month ago, the same town, the same path got hit. Billy Moles, who lives in this house, had just repaired his roof from the last tornado. Now his home is gone, along with at least 40 of his neighbors.
Including Diana Miller, searching for mementos from her home of 50 years. It had to be shocking.
Oh, yeah, I think I'm shocked.
Really just awful. Let's get back to Ginger tonight because this threat tonight goes right into tomorrow as well. And then you were mentioning yet another system behind all this.
And so many of those folks that I met, David, they told me that they went to their cellar, and we're going to need folks to do that tonight. Get to your shelter in your safe place, anywhere in the tornado watch that you see, from Lansing, Michigan, all the way down through Columbus, Maysville, Kentucky, back to Bloomington, Indiana, and up to South Bend. So even parts of Champaign, Illinois, still in that threat tonight. If we time it out, a lot of it happens after the sun goes down, and we know having 2 ways of getting warnings is a great way to stay safe. But look at that, even Pittsburgh through West Virginia, back to even Nashville by 2 a.m. Tomorrow, it's another system that comes in and reinvigorates the atmosphere. I'd say that the tornado threat is focused on Paducah, but it's really west to east, starts in the afternoon like they often do, into the overnight hours again, including Nashville and Memphis. David?
You'll have late information first thing in the morning on GMA for us as well. Ginger, thank you. Meantime, overseas tonight, Israeli tanks rolling into Rafah. As tonight, sources are now telling ABC News that the Biden administration is now delaying shipments of ammunition to Israel amid tense ceasefire talks underway right now in Cairo. Marcus Moore in Israel again tonight.
Tonight, as Israeli tanks rolled into Rafah, crushing an I Love Gaza sign and seizing control of the Palestinian side of that crucial border crossing in southern Gaza, sources telling ABC News the Biden administration is now delaying shipments of ammunition to Israel, appearing to send a message. President Biden for weeks pressuring Israel to hold off on a full-scale invasion of Rafah until it has a credible plan to protect more than 1 million civilians now living there. But Israel going in anyway. The U.S. tonight insisting this is not the major ground invasion it warned Israel about.
This appears to be a limited operation, but of course much of that depends on what comes next.
But Israel's incursion now threatening to derail critical ceasefire talks. Hamas tonight saying there will be no deal if Israel's operation continues, and civilians on both sides desperate for a truce. David, Israel's new operation in Rafah is putting pressure on the ceasefire negotiations, but tonight the defense minister says Israel is ready for compromises to bring the hostages home, but vowing, David, that Rafah operation will deepen if they don't reach a deal.
Marcus Moore in Tel Aviv. Marcus, thank you. Meanwhile, President Biden tonight condemning the surge in anti-Semitism here in the U.S. since the Hamas terror attack on October 7, speaking at a Holocaust remembrance ceremony today. Here's Mary Bruce.
Commemorating the victims of the Holocaust, President Biden tonight forcefully denouncing what he called a ferocious surge in anti-Semitism since the October 7th Hamas attack.
This hatred continues to lie deep in the hearts of too many people in the world.
The president urging Americans not to forget the lessons of the past or the hate that sparked the war now raging in Gaza.
People are already forgetting. They're already forgetting that Hamas unleashed this terror. I have not forgotten, nor have you, and we will not forget.
Facing growing unrest on college campuses, the president recognizing the deep convictions of pro-Palestinian protesters, but Biden making it clear that his support for Israel is steadfast.
My commitment to the safety of the Jewish people, the security of Israel, and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
Now, despite his deep concerns about an invasion of Rafah, the president today avoided any explicit criticism of Israel. He also notably did not directly mention the plight of Palestinians suffering in Gaza. David.
All right, Mary Bruce at the White House again tonight. Late today here in New York City, the deadly shooting, a 16-year-old shot and killed in Soho outside a high-end hotel. Here's Trevor Ault.
Tonight, investigators on the scene after a 16-year-old student was gunned down in broad daylight on the streets of New York City. The shooter and another suspect on the run.
Person shot, Spring and Diabetes.
911 calls pouring in from the typically quiet Soho neighborhood. Just before 2:30 this afternoon, the teenager shot in the head outside a high-end hotel. Police saying those two suspects fled on a rideshare bike. The victim taken to a nearby hospital where they were pronounced dead. Tonight, the NYPD saying the teen attended a charter school and the shooting likely stemmed from a school dispute.
And David, this incident comes as new data shows New York City shootings are down about 16% from last year, though violent crime does generally increase as we head towards summer.
David, all right, Trevor Ault tonight. Trevor, thank you. We turn now to a U.S. soldier being held in a Russian prison. There is video now emerging, and what he says on that video. Let's get right back to Martha Raddatz tonight. Martha, what more do we know about the case tonight?
David, Staff Sergeant Gordon Black's mother warned him not to visit his Russian girlfriend, but tonight he is sitting in a Russian prison charged with stealing from the girlfriend. Black had sent a video greeting to his mom and dad from Iraq in 2009, but the latest videos shared by Radio Free Europe today are from the Russian girlfriend's TikTok account that shows Sergeant Black in uniform there before leaving for Russia, saying, among other things, that NATO is pretty aggressive and that he understands Russia's point of view, saying they want to defend their country. David, the Army is now launching its own investigation to see if Black was targeted by Russian intelligence. David?
Martha Raddatz back with us again tonight on this. Martha, thank you. Now to the frightening moments on board a Delta flight from Cancun to Seattle, the plane landing, but then the crew noticing smoke, and passengers were then rushed off the plane amid an emergency evacuation. Here's Victor Kendo.
They're coming out of the slides.
Tonight, this Delta flight evacuating in Seattle after smoke was spotted near the nose of the plane. The Airbus A321neo arriving from Cancun with 195 passengers and crew late Monday night. The ground crew plugging in for power, which provides the plane electricity when the engines are not running. The crew noticing the smoke as the passengers deboarded.
I saw the fire. I think it was pretty much localized right below that cockpit area.
Delta saying slides were deployed out of an abundance of caution. Some passengers seen exiting onto the wing before coming down, others sliding down the back.
They announced, everybody drop your belongings, unbuckle, and head to the exits. People around were a little panicked, and within like a couple of minutes, I think everyone was out.
No major injuries were reported. Delta is investigating the incident, but focusing on the ground power, not the aircraft. David?
All right, Victor Kendo tonight. Victor, thanks. When we come back here, the deadly home explosion, a husband and wife killed, authorities on the scene. Also, the big change at Panera, the drink they will phase out amid several lawsuits. And tonight, the Boy Scouts, set to get a new name in a moment. Tonight, a deadly home explosion killing a husband and wife. Authorities are searching for the cause in Princeton Township, Minnesota. The couple was in their 60s. The blast was heard for miles. You can see the debris. Authorities say a propane tank was leaking into the air when they arrived. When we come back tonight, the drink soon off the menu at Panera amid several lawsuits. And the Boy Scouts will soon be called something else. To the index tonight, Panera Bread says it's phasing out its charged lemonade within 2 weeks. The highly caffeinated drink linked to multiple lawsuits, including 2 wrongful death cases. Panera added a warning to the drink last year. The Boy Scouts of America is changing its name, soon to be known as Scouting America. Officials say they are focusing on inclusion, making sure boys and girls feel welcome to join. When we come back here tonight, 2 best friends we think you'll be rooting for after tonight.
ABC World News Tonight with David Muir, sponsored by American Home Shield. Be at one with your home systems and appliances. Don't worry, be warranty.
Finally tonight here, the 2 best friends who are definitely America strong. Tonight in Lexington, South Carolina, just outside Columbia, Jules Gray on the left and Ava Shabarami on the right. They have been inseparable since the 1st grade. Both have Down syndrome, taking on life's biggest challenges together, side by side through so much, supporting each other. Elementary school, the local Special Olympics, high school dances, summer jobs. Tonight, the biggest milestone yet, graduating high school and now heading to college together. Both accepted into the University of South Carolina Aiken Pacer Life Program, a prestigious college program designed for students with disabilities. Just 12 students accepted this year, and the 2 best friends are among them. And right here tonight,
Hi, David!
the high school grads off to college, Jules and Ava.
Don't college!
Checking in with us from their job at Biddy and Bo's coffee shop, Aaron, their job trainer, with them too. What are they most excited about for college?
They got jobs and they got money. The job makes money. Yes.
And before college, the 2 will work together this summer. Biddy and Bo's across America employing hundreds of people with disabilities. Ava at the register, Jules with the order. And tonight, they're ready for your order too.
Please come on down and see us at Biddy and Bo's.
They'll try to get in line too, Jules and Ava. We're rooting for you. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
On this Tuesday night, Drake's Toronto mansion becomes a crime scene. The security guard shot outside the Canadian rapper's home.
He was standing outside of the gates in front of the residence.
The investigation and what part Drake's feud with fellow rapper Kendrick Lamar may have played in it. Stormy Daniels testifies at Donald Trump's trial, what the adult film star revealed about their encounter and his payment to keep it secret. Israel takes control of the Rafah border crossing in Gaza.
This morning is one of the darkest in this 7-month-long nightmare.
What it means for the flow of critical aid and where peace talks stand. And sweet dreams are made of this.
We promote added value.
Push to tap into Manitoba's maple syrup.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. An investigation is underway after a shooting outside the Toronto mansion of Canadian rapper Drake. The motive is not clear, but it happened days after another rap superstar, Kendrick Lamar, released a diss track about Drake. The two artists are locked in an intense, ongoing feud that plays out in their music. And then early Tuesday morning, a security guard was shot outside Drake's lavish home in an exclusive neighborhood. Police say they are aware of the musical feud. What's not clear is whether it's now escalated into real violence. Mike Relay has our top story tonight.
This morning at about 2 a.m., police were called to a shooting at the residence behind me here.
Police didn't need to say who lives here. Tucked safely behind a 4.5-meter-high wall, the residence in question is owned by rap superstar Drake. The shooting involved one of his security guards who was standing outside the front gate and who remains in hospital with a gunshot wound.
I cannot confirm if Drake was home at the time the incident occurred, but I can tell you that we are in contact with his team and they are cooperating.
Who did it? Police aren't releasing details of the suspects or their vehicle because of poor video quality. They also aren't speculating as to motive, but they are very much aware of the ongoing feud between Drake and rapper Kendrick Lamar. Since March, the two rap titans have gone back and forth with increasingly disturbing allegations of domestic violence, pedophilia, and cultural appropriation. A third rapper, J. Cole, was involved as well, but bowed out as the threats escalated.
I don't know if y'all can feel that, but the world want to see blood.
Even Saturday Night Live is paying attention.
When Kendrick describes Drake as Canadian, that's because Drake is from Toronto.
Instant gratification. People are waking up first thing in the morning, trying to find on the internet what the latest response is.
Rap battles, says DJ Ron Nelson, have mostly been publicity-driven, although the most famous feud from the mid-90s ended with the deaths of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. They can get personal, vicious, and aren't for the faint of heart.
The thing about hip-hop, though, is it's uncensored music, right? This music is not being released on vinyl. It's like the whole mixtape series where there are no rules. You can say anything you want.
Is the Drake-Kendrick Lamar battle real? If the shooting last night had anything to do with the feud, it is now. Mike Relay, Global News, Toronto.
The woman at the center of Donald Trump's hush money trial gave explicit testimony today about what she says was a sexual encounter with Trump, one he paid to keep secret. Trump, who denies any such encounter, is charged with falsifying business records to hide a payment made to Daniels so she would not publicly share her allegations before the 2016 presidential election. Jackson Prosco reports on what she revealed and why it matters.
Sitting in the same room as the man accused of buying her silence, adult film star Stormy Daniels testified in graphic detail about an alleged sexual encounter with Donald Trump in 2006. She described first meeting Trump at a golf tournament and testified she was eventually invited to meet him at a hotel for what she thought would be dinner. After conversation in the hotel room, Daniels said she went to use the washroom and returned to find Trump sitting on the bed in boxers and a t-shirt. The intention was pretty clear. Somebody stripped down to their underwear and is posing for you, she said. After a consensual sexual encounter, which Daniels described as brief and unprotected, she said she tried to move on. She testified she faced at least one anonymous threat to keep quiet.
Hello, how are you? Hi.
When the infamous Access Hollywood tape dropped right before the 2016 election, Daniels said her publicist suggested she sell her story. She said she eventually learned Trump and his lawyer Michael Cohen were interested in paying her $130,000 in exchange for her silence, which was the best thing that could have happened, she testified, because then I'd be safe and the story wouldn't come out.
They have no case.
The salacious details are the backdrop to a case that is strictly about alleged business fraud. Trump denies the affair and claims payments made to his lawyer Michael Cohen were not reimbursement for the money Cohen paid to Daniels.
The legal expense that we paid was put down as legal expense. There's nothing else you could say.
Trump's defense team moved for a mistrial, arguing Daniels' testimony was prejudicial. The judge denied the request. Under cross-examination, Trump's lawyer asked Daniels, "Am I correct that you hate President Trump?" Daniels replied, "Yes." "And you want him to go to jail?" the lawyer asked. "I want him to be held accountable," Daniels replied. Whether Daniels' testimony makes or breaks the prosecution's case isn't clear, but in the court of public opinion, the most scandalous accusations could hurt Trump's standing, especially with conservative voters. Donna?
Okay, Jackson in Washington, thanks. 3 Indian nationals accused of killing a prominent advocate for Sikh independence made their first court appearance in BC today. The men, all in their 20s, are accused of first-degree murder in the shooting death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. He was killed in the parking lot of a Gurdwara in Surrey, BC last June. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has said there is credible evidence India's government was involved. India denies that. Today, India's top diplomat in Canada spoke publicly about the case. Eric Sorensen reports.
Heavy security around the provincial courthouse in Surrey, BC, as 3 Indian nationals charged with murdering Hardeep Singh Nijjar made appearances by video link. 11 months ago, Nijjar was shot and killed outside a Sikh temple. The 3 men in Canada on different visas were arrested in Edmonton last Friday. In court, their cases were adjourned until May 21st. Several dozen supporters of Niger were inside and outside the courtroom.
People just want to be here and show their support for not only Hardeep Singh but also for the overall movement for Palestine. That India is trying to scare people into kind of cowering by this assassination, and I think they just want them to know that won't happen.
Niger was an activist for an independent Khalistan. To Indian authorities, he was a terrorist. The RCMP made it clear last week that India is a central part of their murder investigation.
And these efforts include investigating connections to the government of India.
The allegations have ruptured diplomatic relations. India's foreign minister stated that Canada is India's biggest problem when it comes to Sikh separatism, and India's high commissioner to this country echoed concerns about those who have become Canadian citizens.
The foreigners having, if I can call it, evil eye on the territorial integrity of India, that is a big red line for us. My concern is national security threats emanating from the land of Canada.
But for Ottawa, the issue is this.
Canada's position has always been clear. Our job is to protect Canadians, and we stand by the allegations that a Canadian was killed on Canadian soil by Indian agents.
Another minister, Harjit Sajjan, says the case has made him and his family a target of misinformation by India. He defends the Canadian police investigation.
I know that Canadians right now feel very confident in their police forces of the ongoing investigation at this time.
India's envoy said his country is ready to sit down and resolve the diplomatic rift, but there is little that political leaders can resolve in a murder case that is now in a Canadian court. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
6 Canadian children held at a Syrian detention camp are back in Canada tonight. Global News obtained this photo of the children. They're holding a sign thanking their family's lawyer. The children and their mother were being held in northeast Syria after the area was reclaimed from the so-called Islamic State. Their mother, who's from Quebec, had been denied entry to Canada. Her lawyer says she's since left the detention camp. It's unclear where she is now. In Gaza, the Israeli army says it's taken operational control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah border crossing to Egypt, choking off a critical aid route. Troops rolled into Rafah after a night of deadly airstrikes. Israel claims its ground operation there will be limited, but its army is now everywhere in Gaza. And as an Israeli tank crushed an I Love Gaza sign, the message is that the ground assault will not stop until Hamas is destroyed and the hostages returned. More than 1.4 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah.
An assault on Rafah would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare.
Crystal Gamansing reports on the Israeli offensive and whether diplomacy can do anything to stop it.
Israeli forces took control of the Rafah border crossing and raised their flag, a symbolic move ordered by the Prime Minister as ground forces entered the last untouched area of Gaza. Military pressure on Hamas is a necessary condition for the return of our hostages, said Benjamin Netanyahu. With this latest military operation, humanitarian groups warn of even worse conditions for the more than 1 million displaced Palestinians.
The two main arteries for getting aid into Gaza is currently choked off.
Monday evening, it appeared as if a ceasefire was near. Hamas said it agreed to a deal presented by Qatar and Egypt. Israel rejected the notion, saying the deal was not what they had last presented, but committed to continuing talks.
If the only way to get the hostages back is by providing an Israeli guarantee to end this war, then end this war.
As hostage families rally and beg for their loved one's safe return, Canada and other countries continued calls for a ceasefire.
We need to make sure that hostages be released. We need humanitarian aid to go into Gaza.
Officials from the United States refused to comment on reports that it paused delivery on a shipment of munition to Israel. Speaking at a Holocaust remembrance event, the president reaffirmed support for Israel.
The security of Israel and its right to exist as an independent Jewish state is ironclad, even when we disagree.
The U.S. is against a large-scale military operation in Rafah. Israel's defense minister was on the ground and warned that's exactly what could happen if Hamas doesn't return the more than 100 hostages. Crystal Gamansing, Global News, London.
Vladimir Putin began his 5th term as Russian president with a ceremony at the Kremlin today. Russia's political elite were invited to the lavish inauguration. Putin first took office nearly 25 years ago. He then changed the constitution. His new term won't expire until 2030. Then he's eligible to run for another 6 years. In March, Putin won an overwhelming majority in stage-managed elections. Opposition candidates in Russia have been killed, jailed, or gone into exile. Ukraine says it's foiled a Russian plot to assassinate President Volodymyr Zelensky. 2 Ukrainian colonels tasked with protecting top officials have been detained. They're suspected of treason, accused of being involved with the plan drawn up by Russia's Federal Security Service. Ukraine says the plotters had aimed to use a mole to get information about Zelensky's location, which they then would have attacked with rockets, drones, and anti-tank grenades. The military unit that carries out Canada's most sensitive and dangerous missions, the Canadian Special Operations Command, has a new leader tonight. Global News obtained exclusive access to the ceremony in Ottawa today, where Major General Steve Boivin handed over command to Brigadier General Steve Hunter. Both government and military sources tell Global News General Boivin will now command all domestic and foreign military operations. TikTok takes action. Coming up, how it hopes to stop a potential ban in the U.S. A tornado ripped through this small Oklahoma town overnight, destroying dozens of homes and toppling trees and power lines. At least 1 person was killed. 2 others are missing. This is the second twister to hit that town in a span of 5 weeks. Authorities say at least 17 tornadoes were reported in 7 U.S. states overnight, and warnings are still in place tonight for millions of Americans in the Midwest. TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance are suing the U.S. government over a law that could force a nationwide ban of the app. The lawsuit was filed less than 2 weeks after a bill was passed that would force ByteDance to sell the social media app or face a ban in the U.S. TikTok argues the law is unconstitutional. It sets up a legal battle that will determine whether U.S. national security concerns take priority over the free speech rights of 150 million American TikTok users. High hopes for Boeing's first crewed trip to space were dashed last night after a last-minute issue with a valve.
The vehicle is not in a configuration where we can proceed with flight today.
The NASA mission was scrubbed 2 hours before it was scheduled to lift off. Astronauts were ready and waiting when a faulty rocket valve was detected on the launch vehicle. It is another setback for Boeing. The Starliner has already faced years of delays. The mission has been further delayed until at least Friday. Fighting foreign interference ahead, diaspora communities weigh in on Canada's plans to tackle it. Members of several of Canada's diaspora communities are concerned about the federal government's new bill intended to counter foreign interference. It includes a foreign agent registry and changes to legislation governing Canada's spy agency. David Aiken takes a deeper look at what people are worried about.
Thank you for joining us.
The bill tabled by Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc Monday has several measures to combat clandestine foreign interference, a foreign agent registry, new criminal code offenses, and an expanded role for CSIS to protect diaspora communities. Measures, some say, are welcome if overdue.
These changes and these amendments are coming almost a year after the unprecedented assassination of a Canadian citizen.
Lawyer Prabhat Singh represented a coalition of Canadian Sikh groups at the public inquiry into foreign interference. He likes the bill's requirement that security agencies will now have a mandate to share interference intelligence with city councils, universities, businesses, and community groups.
That has been one of the consistent calls from within the community, is that the only way to combat foreign interference effectively.
Good morning.
Gloria Fung speaks for a cross-section of Canadian diaspora groups who met with MPs on the issue last week.
At first glance, the proposed act looks good and strong.
That's correct. In fact, I got 2 briefings.
MP Jenny Kwan told the inquiry she's been a victim of interference by China, and she thinks the new bill will help counter that.
The legislation in and of itself is not going to address all of the concerns for foreign interference activities. It's one tool in the toolbox, which is an important tool that the NDP has been calling for a very long time.
The key now, get the measures in place quickly.
I'm concerned about the timing of its implementation.
The bill has to pass before the next election, and it has to be in effect before the next election.
Finally, some have complained that Ottawa seems to place foreign policy objectives ahead of the security of Canadians at home, and it's not clear any legislation will reverse that perception. That's really something that could take a culture change inside government. Donna.
Okay, David in Ottawa, thank you. The federal government says British Columbia's request to recriminalize the use of illicit drugs in public spaces has been granted. The changes take effect immediately.
Moving forward with any kind of pilot like the one in BC, we know that we have to have a balance, public safety and public health. That means there needs to be sufficient health services in place, scaled out to meet people where they're at, and also law enforcement to have the tools that they need to ensure that public safety is a priority.
BC had a 3-year criminal code exemption for personal possession of small amounts of drugs like heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamines, and using in public areas like parks had been allowed until today's change. The overdose crisis in BC continues to claim a staggering number of lives. The BC Coroner Service says 192 people were killed by illicit drugs in March. 84% of those deaths have occurred not on the street, but inside homes, shelters, or other indoor spaces. Sweet times. Next, how Manitoba is tapping into the maple syrup industry. It hasn't been a sweet year for Canada's maple syrup industry. Statistics Canada reports production hit a 5-year low. A warm winter means less sap is running, and increasing demand means Quebec's syrup reserve is dwindling fast. So a new player is entering the market. Melissa Ridgen takes us to McCreary, Manitoba, 3 hours northwest of Winnipeg, where the sweet season is well underway.
Maple syrup gets its very own weekend-long festival in McCreary. While most don't think of the pancake topper as a Manitoba delicacy, syrup is king here. And the king of kings is Bob Gass.
These are good, about a half.
He taps 1,000 trees on his property.
That's really good. That one's particularly sweet.
While his operation is among the biggest in the province, Manitoba doesn't even make up 1% of Canada's maple syrup production. But it could, or maybe should.
Well, if it weighs
With warmer weather affecting eastern production, Manitoba often gets a longer spell of freezing nights and warmer days, conditions needed to produce sap.
Oh, yeah.
Add to that, the Manitoba maple tree is different than the sugar maples and the red maples out east, and make for a different, some might even say better, flavor.
There's a difference. So most of us in the business like the darker syrup. But of course, it's got to be quality, of course. It can't be burnt or anything like that.
The Maple Syrup Festival offers an opportunity to teach and inspire others to get into the business, something Gass would welcome.
The potential is there. The biggest holdup we have is not a lot of folks doing it at a commercial level.
With production struggles in eastern Canada and the national syrup supply dwindling, Manitoba's agriculture minister sees an opportunity.
We promote added value, and we definitely maybe took some serious opportunity. Let's make it happen in the province of Manitoba.
For now, though, Manitoba's maple syrup is mostly enjoyed locally, of course on pancakes, but also in lattes, rolled in snow, and in desserts.
The winner is number 3, and it is maple cheesecake.
Gass hopes by the time the sap runs next spring, more Manitobans are tapping into trees and setting up sugar shacks. Cash in on liquid gold. Melissa Ridgen, Global News, McCreary, Manitoba.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. We'll stay in Manitoba for tonight's Your Canada. This red fox relaxing in Winnipeg. We'd love to see Your Canada. Please email it to viewers@globalnational.com. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. We look now at how Gaza solidarity encampments are continuing at college campuses across the U.S. despite brutal police crackdowns. In the latest roundup, at least 43 students were arrested Monday at UCLA. The Intercept reports after New York police raided Columbia University encampment last week, some of the arrested students were denied water and food for about 16 hours. 2 protesters were held in solitary confinement. On Monday, Columbia canceled its main university-wide graduation ceremony May 15th, amidst mounting fallout from its mishandling of the peaceful protests. Meanwhile, Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner visited the University of Pennsylvania Gaza Solidarity Encampment last week to speak with organizers and legal observers.
The First Amendment comes from here. This is Philadelphia. We don't have to do stupid like they did in Columbia. We don't have to do stupid. What we should be doing here is upholding our tradition of being a welcoming, inviting city where people say things, even if other people don't like them, because they have a right to say it in the United States, and where protesters also have an obligation to remain nonviolent and to engage in speech activity and in activity that does not become legal.
That's Philadelphia District Attorney Larry Krasner at the encampment at UPenn. This comes as more than 50 chapters of the American Association of University Professors, the AAUP, have issued a statement condemning the violent arrest by police at campus protests. This includes our next guest, Dartmouth professor, former chair of Jewish Studies, Annalise Orlick, who says police body slammed her to the ground as she tried to protect her students when officers in riot gear cleared the peaceful encampment on Dartmouth's campus. Annalise Orlick is a professor of history, women's gender and sexuality studies, former chair of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth College, where she's taught for more than 30 years. Professor Orlick was among dozens of students, faculty, and community members arrested at the Dartmouth encampment last week. She's been charged with criminal trespass and temporarily banned from portions of Dartmouth's campus. She's joining us now from Thetford, Vermont. Professor Orlick, thanks so much for being with us. Can you take us through what happened that day? Where were you? Why did you decide to go to this encampment? And then what happened?
We were concerned that the students might be subject to some kind of violence. I didn't really think there was going to be arrest, but I didn't know for sure. The institution had sent out a very strict list of do's and don'ts earlier in the day, and it was clear that they were going to try to break up the encampment as quickly as possible. So there were a whole bunch of us, there were dozens of faculty out there to try to support them, and I was in a line of mostly older women, most of us Jewish, and the riot police came at us and started trying to literally physically push people off the green. We were standing in front of our students, between the students and the riot police, in the hope of preventing violence. That didn't happen. My students and I were subject to really violent handling in the course of our arrest, and it's possible that I was subject to the most violent handling.
What happened to you?
I was videoing my students' arrests. I was telling the police, they're just students, they're not criminals, leave them alone. And suddenly I was body slammed from behind by these very large men in body armor, and hard enough that my feet left the ground for a few seconds. I landed on the ground in front of the protesters. They had taken my phone, and so I got up to try to demand my phone, and then they grabbed me under the arm, slammed me to the ground, dragged me face down on the grass. You know, one guy had his knee on me, and honestly, Amy, I heard myself saying what I'd seen in videos so many times: "You're hurting me, I can't breathe, stop." And they said to me what they've said to so many victims of police brutality: "You're talking, you can breathe." They then put on the zip tie cuffs on me, on a colleague, my colleague Christopher McEvitt, and on many of our students so tightly that people have nerve damage, compressed nerves, severe pain. So that's what happened to us that night. And the university has not dropped charges for criminal trespass or even asked the DA to drop the charges. So we are all banned from the Green, which is the center of campus, from the administration building where we would go to protest, and from the street on which the president's house stands.
And Professor Orlick, the faculty met with the Dartmouth president yesterday, Monday. Could you talk about what was discussed and what was the message of the faculty to the administration?
The message of the faculty was: drop all the charges now, apologize for the harm and trauma you've inflicted on the campus, promise that there will be no riot police called to campus again, change your policies on protest to be less restrictive, and to acknowledge constitutional protections on free speech, and get rid of the Palestine exception to free speech. People have to be able to talk about Palestine without being attacked by police with clubs, gas, and God knows what else.
I want to ask you, Professor Orlick, you're a professor of history, of women's gender and sexuality studies, former chair of Jewish Studies. President Biden is going to be giving an address on anti-Semitism today, issuing what they say is a clarion call to fight swiftly rising tide of anti-Semitism across the United States, and especially on college campuses. I put this question to the Israeli peace negotiator Daniel Levy as well. But if you can talk about whether you see this rise, and also the equating of anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, and the number of Jewish professors and students who are part of these protests.
Yes, I think this protest movement has a large and disproportionate percentage of Jewish students and faculty involved, because we all feel very strongly that we don't want this genocide in Gaza in our name. And I was really struck by the fact that there was some reporting, I think, by The Guardian and BBC that I heard today, that people stirring up a lot of trouble and saying things outside the gates at Columbia were tied to the Proud Boys, that there were people who attacked the protesters at UCLA so violently and who had ties to Trump rallies. And I think it's deeply ironic that the House Republicans who supported the January 6th assault on the Capitol, in which people were wearing Camp Auschwitz shirts and shirts with a logo that says 6MWE, 6 million wasn't enough, and that they have become the defenders against anti-Semitism. I heard nothing. There were Buddhist, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish chaplains at our protest. The students were singing, they were chanting. Yes, there was some of the River to the Sea chant that many Jews find so offensive and believe is a call to genocide. I accept the interpretation made by my Palestinian colleagues and students that this chant is about equality from the river to the sea and freedom. So I don't see any anti-Semitism, and you should know that many Jewish faculty at Dartmouth signed a letter insisting that the president not speak in our name and not use anti-Semitism to rationalize bringing these violent forces onto our campus.
And Professor, your message to the students who've led and organized these peaceful protests for months, despite all of this repression?
Well, my students are, our students are holding another rally today on one of the parts of the campus we're not banned from, which is the grass in front of the library. And I think their bravery is tremendous and it's inspiring. And they really feel like this is the moral issue of their time, that there's a genocide going on and that they can't ignore it. And again, I have colleagues at Columbia, colleagues at UCLA, and in many parts of the country who have been part of the, not part of the encampments, but have visited the encampments, have spoken to the students there, have not felt threatened, have not felt anti-Semitism. Certainly at Dartmouth we didn't. And there's a very powerful open letter from a Christian pastor who was there who's saying the same thing. So stop weaponizing anti-Semitism. It's offensive and it's wrong.
Finally, Professor Ehrlich, how are you right now, having been beaten to the ground? And also, you're banned from your campus where you've taught for over 30 years, parts of it?
Yes, I was initially, as a condition of my bail, banned from the entire campus, but the college insisted that was a clerical error and, gave light to their argument that they can't get, charges changed or dropped by calling the local police department and, getting them to change my bail so that I can teach. So I can now teach, but my building is on one of the streets that I'm banned from. So I was having to run up the street yesterday in sunglasses really quickly, trying to get to my class, and not get arrested. It's ridiculous. And the green is the very center of our campus. We all cross it many times a day. My kids grew up playing on the green. The idea that we can't have access to the beating heart of our campus is offensive again. And, just gives a sense, the president makes this argument that she's trying to ensure that the green is open to people with all views and that, the 5 tenths and 10 students who were camped out there would make the green a place that only people of one view could be. Honestly, I think that's what they did by making us frightened. I'm still hurting. I have nerve damage in my wrist. I have an injured shoulder. I have bruising and swelling, and it's very scary. And I'm getting better, but it's crazy that I should be in this position for trying to protect my students, and I say the same for other faculty who are out there, including Chris McKevitt, my colleague on the faculty, who was also arrested and also harmed.
Annalise Ehrlich, we want to thank you for being with us, Professor of History, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, former Chair of Jewish Studies at Dartmouth College, where she's taught for more than 30 years. Professor Ehrlich, among dozens of students, faculty, community members arrested at a Dartmouth encampment. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez for another edition of Democracy Now! Democracy Now! is...
Watch Biden's chief economic aide crash as he tries to explain cash. Jared Bernstein gives us our video of the day. He may be the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, but don't ask him about money. It's like Michael Moore trying to grasp the concept of soap. Watch Bernstein struggle to answer why the U.S. borrows currency that we can just print ourselves.
Like you said, they print the dollar. So why does the government even borrow?
Well, again, some of this stuff gets... Some of the language some of the language and concepts are just confusing. I mean, the government definitely prints money, and it definitely lends that money, which is why the government definitely prints money, and then it lends that money by selling bonds. Is that what they do? They sell bonds. Yeah, they sell bonds, right? Because they sell bonds, and people buy the bonds and lend them the money. I guess I can't really talk. I don't get it. I don't know what they're talking about. Like, because it's like the government clearly prints money. It does it all the time, and it clearly borrows. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this debt and deficit conversation. So I don't think there's anything confusing there.
No, not at all. What did he just say? That's from a documentary called Finding the Money. I think it should be called Finding the Idiot. I never thought I'd wish Kamala would come in to explain the situation. Jimmy.
Yes.
All right.
I watched it.
Yeah.
I know what he's trying to say.
What's he trying to say?
We're all... How is that guy in charge of econ, okay? Like, we had Larry Kudlow there in the past.
Yeah.
And Kudlow obviously can articulate modern monetary theory or anything in between. Mm-hmm. That dude actually starts doing, I don't do impressions, he's doing a walk-in impression.
Yeah.
They're like, so how can we print money and borrow? And he goes, well, he's like doing a walk-in.
Yeah,
That's embarrassing.
He said when you say again, there should be something that you already said. I actually asked Larry, because I figured I'd go like, Larry, what was he trying to say? He goes, well, I won't say what he really said, but he said, when the Fed buys bonds, it increases money supply. When the Fed sells bonds, it withdraws money. So what did we just watch?
I mean, he did better than I thought he would, honestly. This is just one example of what happens all the time. I mean, the government all the time has people who have know even less what they're talking about, influencing policy in even a larger way. Mm-hmm. I mean, it is kind of sad that he's supposed to be like the economy guy and he couldn't do better on that. But think about all the things the government's involved in. Most people don't know. They'll be voting for bills they haven't read. They'll be regulating industries they know nothing about. And this is why I don't have any faith in any of them. Because I think that this is very rare for us to see it. But I don't think that this level of incompetence is rare at all in our government.
Were they fair to him, Tyrus?
No. You need to give way more respect to the chief economist. The chief. Which means when he walks in the room, the chief's top guy. Yeah. That's the top guy.
Yeah.
Listen. Chief economist. I don't know nothing about this, and I could have lied way better. I would have been like, well, first of all, you got to take fiduciary. He didn't use any big words. He didn't even try. Listen, in life, when you ask somebody a question and they go, well, just say liar. You don't know what you're doing. Like, this dude is so unqualified. He's comfortable with it. Like, that's how you thought after that interview, he got fired. If he'd have been a guest on this show, you wouldn't have seen him after commercial. There'd have been someone else sitting in his chair, and we would have pretended like he never existed. Chief economist. Well, I don't know. What do you think?
I was almost waiting for him to say the election was flat.
Yeah, I mean...
Oh, I remember that!
Let's go back to our worst guest we ever had.
Long story short, we've seen better chiefs at Elizabeth Warren's house.
Oh.
Good night.
Yeah, just want to
do the flat election story.
And he didn't know about money, so we're all good.
You know who had the best day at the White House when this video came out? Karine Jean-Pierre.
Yes.
So she sat back, she said, finally, someone else is worse. And she's probably sitting there just with her popcorn, saying, Jared, you need a binder. You should have brought your binder. Because that was that level bad, I think.
Do you know, get this guy, he has no degrees in economics, which I'm not going to hold against him, but I should. I should hold against him. But he went to the Manhattan School of Music and has a degree in, get this, social welfare. That's the problem. Nobody should have a degree in social welfare.
And I think it's from Columbia. I'm not even kidding. No, I think it's actually from Columbia.
That might make sense.
But he's the chief. Economist. Top dog. Number one.
Well,
the guy.
At least the president is in full command. So we'll be
he's well aware and he's concerned.
You know what's funny is we still didn't get the answer that why do you borrow money and then pay interest on it when you can just print money? I don't even know the answer to that. But I'm not the chief freaking.
At least we're going to circle back to that. Something. Give us something.
Isn't it crazy to think the previous guy was better with money and he owned a gold toilet?
Yes.
You know? That's crazy.
Hey, don't knock a gold toilet. All right. That's my nickname for William Devane. Up next, a bizarre scene and a possible time machine.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page. And
The parents of Jake and Callum Robinson pay tribute to their sons murdered in Mexico.
Our hearts are broken and the world has become a darker place for us. Now it's time to bring them home to family and friends. And the ocean waves in Australia.
Also ahead, the driver of a bus that crashed and killed 10 wedding guests to appear in court. Israel pushes on with its operation to destroy Hamas in Rafah, despite warnings of a humanitarian catastrophe. Former adult film actress Stormy Daniels testifies at Donald Trump's hush money trial. And an early exit from the Eurovision Song Contest for Australia's Electric Fields. Hello and welcome to Mornings. I'm Gemma Vaness. Let's have a look at the weather in the capital cities for today. There's a possible shower in Brisbane, showers in Sydney, and a possible shower in Canberra. Becoming mostly sunny in Melbourne, heading for 18 there, showers in Hobart, and sunny weather for Adelaide, Perth and Darwin. The Australian market is managing modest gains. We're going to check these figures in more detail soon with Alicia Barry. The parents of murdered Perth brothers Jake and Callum Robinson have made an emotional address in Mexico as they prepare to bring home their sons' bodies. North America correspondent Carrington Clark is in Baja California.
Deborah and Martin Robinson went to a beach in San Diego just around the corner from where their late son Callum was most recently living in order to convey their devastation at the loss of their boys and to also thank those people who have been supporting them through what must have been the most horrific week imaginable. When they realised that their two boys had gone missing in Baja California and raised the alarm with local authorities, they couldn't imagine that the week would end with the discovery of their bodies along with their travel companion and friend Carter Road in a well. All three men had been killed by gunshots to the head. What we heard today from Deborah and Martin though was how important their boys were to them and how important they were to other people.
Now it's time to bring them home to family and friends. And the ocean waves in Australia. Please, live bigger, shine brighter, and love harder in their memory.
And while today is about remembering these two fine young men and their friend from America, here in Ensenada, the investigation continues into who murdered them in such horrific circumstances. The Attorney General of Baja California says their primary hypothesis at this point is that the men were killed when a robbery went wrong, that somebody had attempted to steal the tires off the ute that they were traveling in, there was some sort of confrontation, and it ended with all three men being shot in the head. At the moment, there is one man who has been charged with what's called forced disappearance, and that charge was laid before the three bodies were formally identified. Jesus Moreno is expected to appear in court tomorrow, and we are expecting those charges to be upgraded to murder. At the same time that he was arrested, his brother and romantic partner were also arrested. They haven't been charged in relation to either the murders or the disappearances, but instead in regards to drug crimes. But the Attorney General does say that she does believe other people were involved. The question for many, though, is whether or not organised crime had some part in this. And what we are waiting to hear is whether or not further evidence has been gathered in subsequent days. And although the Attorney General says their primary hypothesis is that this was a robbery gone wrong, they cannot rule out that cartels are involved. And given the nature of the killings, given the fact that the three bodies were discovered in a well, along with a fourth body, apparently another victim, which they say is unrelated to this particular series of killings, have many questioning whether or not organised crime is behind it. But for now, the Robinson family still have to go through the traumatic process of getting their boys home. The bodies are still here in Mexico, and they are being prepared for travel back to Australia.
Got some breaking news. A bus driver charged over a fatal crash in the New South Wales Hunter Valley has pleaded guilty to multiple offences, while charges of manslaughter have been withdrawn. Brett Andrew Button was charged with a total of 89 offences over the crash at Greta in June 2023, which killed 10 people and injured 25 others who were returning home from a wedding. In Newcastle local court today, Button pleaded guilty to 10 counts of dangerous driving occasioning death and 9 counts of dangerous driving occasioning grievous bodily harm. He also pleaded guilty to 16 related offences of driving furiously and causing bodily harm to survivors. The court heard 10 charges of manslaughter were withdrawn and dismissed. Button will be sentenced at a later date. Hamas and Israeli representatives are in Cairo to try to negotiate a ceasefire deal for Gaza again. The US has called for the Rafah crossing to reopen after Israel took control of it late yesterday. Benjamin Netanyahu's government claims it was being used for terrorist purposes, but is yet to provide evidence of that. Here's our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons.
I think part of what's going on at the moment in Rafah is posturing as well by both sides, by both the Israeli army and Hamas. 3 days before, Hamas fired some rockets at Kerem Shalom crossing, killed 3 or 4 Israeli soldiers, and I think they were trying to make a statement that we still have military capability and therefore we're going to the negotiating table with some strength. And I think likewise, Israel is wanting to make the point that they can get to the very south of Gaza Strip. They've gone the whole length now, and that essentially they've cleared, as they would use that term with the exception of Rafah, the whole of the Gaza Strip. So I think a lot of it is for the purposes of the negotiations going on, but also I think strategically Israel wants to ensure that none of the Hamas fighters who are still in Rafah, and that's where most of the remaining Hamas fighters are, can get into Egypt through that crossing.
What happened at the crossing yesterday?
What happened yesterday was the Israeli army with tanks that we can see now essentially went down there. They faced no opposition, as you can see, there's no resistance there. That's to the south of Rafah. That's just on the outskirts of the town, so they haven't gone right into the centre of Rafah where there would be many Hamas fighters left, and so they've essentially gone in there, sealed it off, shown the Israeli flag, and as I say, I think it's a statement of victory from their for their public as much as anything.
And they claim that this crossing was being used for terrorist purposes. Did they expand on that?
No, they haven't, and I take the Israeli army as any organisation, Hamas, any group. We need to look with speculation and with scepticism at some of what they're saying. Don't forget it was the Israeli government and army who accused the UNRWA officials, 12 of them, of being complicit in the October 7 attacks. And on the basis of that claim, that unsubstantiated claim, Australia, amongst other countries, Penny Wong and Anthony Albanese, cut off funding to UNRWA, and without a skerrick of evidence for that claim. And in fact, there still has been no evidence, and various countries are resuming it. So I take that with scepticism. However, having said that, it's a war. And, Israel is fighting Hamas, and they strategically obviously think it's better to encircle Rafah, which have now done by having the troops around the south, the tanks. They now have Rafah encircled. So the question is, do they actually go into the centre of Rafah, which is what is making the United States and other countries very nervous.
And the US has urged Israel to reopen that crossing. As you said there was little resistance there. How vital is it?
Absolutely vital. I mean, the media often talks about Gaza's on the brink of famine. Gaza is in famine now. There's no better source for that than Cindy McCain, the head of the World Food Programme, who says that there is a full-blown famine in Gaza, in the north of Gaza right now. Children, people are dying now, have been dying for some time. It's been 7 months or so where there's been very, very limited food, water, medicines, anything getting in there. Occasionally, a few trucks will get in and then it will be closed off again. So essentially, nothing's getting in there now. As you can see, Rafah is the main crossing where the aid's been coming in, and obviously the aid, trucks do not want to be coming in if they've got 10 or 15 Israeli tanks in front of them.
John, tell us about this path that Benjamin Netanyahu is treading. He's got pressure from the far right of his government, pressure from the families of the hostages, and also the international pressure.
That's right. He has the US President and the White House on one side wanting an end to this. Clearly, the head of the CIA, William Burns, has been in Cairo. He's trying to broker a deal. They have the families of the hostages, as you say, who are getting increasingly angry and believe that 7 months on, their relatives should have been out months ago. And then, and this is the most powerful group on Benjamin Netanyahu, which is extraordinary that they're more powerful than the President of the United States. 2 men, Ben Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who are very hardline right-wingers. Recently on the Four Corners program, the former head of Shin Bet, Ami Alon, described them to me as terrorists. And as the former head of the security service, I think he has the credibility to use those sorts of terms. They are really hardliners, and they are saying you must prosecute the war all the way to the end. No deals with Hamas. We do not give up. And if they withdraw their support for the coalition, Benjamin Netanyahu is the next prime minister. So they're the 2 people primarily he's listening to.
Vladimir Putin has been inaugurated into his 5th presidential term in a ceremony boycotted by many Western officials. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it's foiled a Russian plot to assassinate the president and other high-ranking officials. Europe correspondent Isabella Higgins has more.
President Putin arrived at the Grand Kremlin Palace and walked down a red carpet that has been rolled out for him many times before. He was surrounded by supporters who were clapping and cheering and celebrating as he took this oath of allegiance. Now, this is his 5th presidential term. He was first elected in 2000, and during his time in power, he has curbed democratic freedoms in Russia, as well as silencing many of his critics. So as he begins this new 6-year stint in power, some say that he is more powerful than ever, but he's also under enormous pressure. It's been more than 2 years since he launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine. That has been incredibly costly, and at this point, there is still no clear path to victory. It's also forced his relationship with many Western leaders to completely collapse. Officials from the US, many European nations, and also Australia chose not to attend his inauguration. Now, while President Putin was addressing the crowds, he talked about his relationship with the West, but also said that he had one clear priority for this next presidential term.
I'm assuring you that the security interests of Russian people will continue to be above all for me. We will determine the fate of Russia ourselves.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's security service say that they have foiled an assassination plot on President Volodymyr Zelensky. They claim that it was planned to be a gift that coincided with President Vladimir Putin's inauguration. Now, the Ukrainian security service say that this was 2 individuals who were embedded in one of Ukraine's state departments, that they had been recruited by Russian security services and were giving classified information to Moscow. Now, Kyiv has not given any details on when this pair were arrested, and the Kremlin have not commented, with all focus on President Putin's inauguration.
The New York hush money trial of former President Donald Trump has heard from the prosecution's star witness. Adult film actress Stormy Daniels has given evidence about an alleged sexual liaison she had with Donald Trump in 2006 and how she negotiated a payment to cover it up. Emily Grimenz reports from Washington. Well, Stormy Daniels' evidence was quite detailed and at times quite lurid. She described meeting Donald Trump at an event at Lake Tahoe in 2006. She said she was 27 at the time, and Mr. Trump, she said at the time, was old enough to be her father. She said her father at that time was 60 years old. She said that she was invited to dinner with Mr. Trump via his bodyguard, and when she went to his hotel suite, he greeted her at the door wearing satin pajamas, though she said he did change into dress pants and a shirt after she made a joke about Hugh Hefner. Her evidence was that they then talked for a few hours. She asked him about his then new wife, Melania, and their newly born son, Barron. She also said that he told her at one point that she reminded him of his daughter because she was also blonde, beautiful, smart, and likely to be underestimated. Ms. Daniels said that because she'd been drinking quite a lot of water as they'd been talking over a couple of hours, she went to the bathroom, and when she came out, Mr. Trump was standing and blocking the exit from the room. She's described starting to have a feeling that she'd misread the situation. She said she felt physically almost like she'd stood up too quickly, and then she gave evidence that the two of them had sex, which Mr. Trump has always denied. Ms. Daniels' evidence went on to say that she kept in touch with Mr. Trump for a couple of years after that. He used to call her regularly, she said, and it became a little bit of a running joke. She would put him on speakerphone for the people that she was with. There was this prospect that maybe she would be cast on a season of Celebrity Apprentice, but then they lost touch over the years. She moved to Texas and started her own family. And around the time of the 2016 US presidential campaign, the first time Mr. Trump was running for president, Ms. Daniels started to feel that she did actually want the story out there. But she gave evidence that she eventually negotiated a payment of $130,000 US, about 200,000 Australian dollars in today's money, to keep that story to herself, to effectively stay silent. Actually, during Ms. Daniels' evidence, the judge, Warren Moshan, pulled her up a couple of times and said, "You're giving too much detail. You need to give a simpler, more straight to the point answer." He also reprimanded the prosecution for soliciting too much detail from Ms. Daniels. And when the court broke for lunch and Mr. Trump's defense team came back after that break, they put it to the judge that this was actually grounds for a mistrial, because they said Ms. Daniels' evidence overstepped the mark, that some of it was designed purely to embarrass Mr. Trump and didn't have anything to do with the actual substance of the allegations in this case, which are about falsifying business records in order to cover up those hush money payments, so as the prosecution says, so as not to damage Mr. Trump's chances in the 2016 election. Now, the judge listened to this argument. He said that he wasn't going to declare a mistrial and the remedy could come through cross-examination by Mr. Trump's lawyers, which has now begun. And his lawyers are questioning Ms. Daniels' account of things. They've asked her if she's embellished some of these details. They've put it to her that this story has made her a lot of money. And Ms. Daniels countered to that it's also cost her a lot of money. And meanwhile, the former president's trial on charges of mishandling classified documents has been deferred indefinitely. Mr. Trump had been due to face trial on the 20th of this month, but US District Judge Eileen Cannon has ruled that several legal issues surrounding this case need to be resolved before a new date can be set. The Federal Treasurer has flagged that housing will be a major focus of next Tuesday's budget. The government is racing to meet a target of building 1.2 million homes in 5 years, attempting to lure more construction workers into the sector. Political reporter Tom Lowry has more.
There are a few things we know already ahead of Tuesday night's budgets, including some announcements this morning about $90 million in funding to try and encourage more young people into the construction sector. This is for 15,000 new fee-free TAFE places and 5,000 new pre-apprenticeship placements, trying to give people a taste of the sector, I suppose, and encourage them into apprenticeships, as well as new funding to streamline visa applications for tradies from overseas, countries with similar qualification systems to Australia. Think, for example, the UK, trying to encourage more of those overseas workers into Australia to try and help the sector, which the government's accepted is quite stretched. It has this target of 1.2 million new homes within 5 years. There have been suggestions just in the past few weeks that target could be very hard to reach, so the government trying to give some assistance to the construction sector there as part of Tuesday night's budget. There's also another interesting issue to watch, which is rent assistance. The Treasurer has been sending out some interesting signals on this one. He's pointed to last year's announcement as part of last year's budget that rent assistance would be increased by 15%, saying the government does have some form in this area, so that is potentially something to watch for on Tuesday night as well. Perhaps some more assistance for some renters there too. Here's a bit of what Jim Chalmers had to say on this issue on RN Breakfast this morning.
It will be a major focus of the budget on Tuesday. We know that there's not enough homes. We need to build much more housing in our communities and in our country. We've made some quite big investments already, and people should expect to see more on Tuesday night.
But Tom, the government is steering around some bigger policy questions.
Yeah, interestingly, the Treasurer said this morning that tax reform is on the cards as part of Tuesday night's budget, more than just the changes to the Stage 3 tax cuts that we're very well aware of. But we don't know exactly which path he's heading down here, but he has been very clear that one particular policy area isn't up for discussion, and that's negative gearing. Of course, Labor has a bit of a history in this space. It took changes to negative gearing to 2 consecutive elections, but has since dropped the policy. It's always coming up again as perhaps another policy idea, but Jim Chalmers has been very clear that won't be part of the thinking when Tuesday night's budget is handed down.
Experts attending Canberra crisis talks on missing and murdered women say the roundtable was a good step, but now action must be urgently prioritised. They've told the ABC they've reached saturation point on consultations, and there are things governments can do right now on frontline funding and housing to help stop the problem. Political reporter Claudia Long has more from Parliament House.
What actions need to be urgently prioritised to prevent women's deaths? That was one question on the agenda at yesterday's crisis talks that were convened by the Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Commissioner, Michaela Cronin. She was joined by those who've lost a loved one to violence, frontline workers, advocates and peak bodies working at every level on this crisis. They've got the answers to help stop these killings, but they say they need governments to walk the walk and not just talk the talk if they're serious about ending it. Executive Director of the National Women's Safety Alliance, Catherine Burney, says it's time to act.
We have reached a saturation point of consultation, and I think it's incredibly important that we start to put into action what people are saying. It's the right time. There is never going to be a perfect time to change policy, invest more more. We've just got to do it. We've got to make a decision that women's lives in Australia mean enough for us to have that meaningful investment and collaboration.
On investment, Antoinette Braybrook, the CEO of Dejira, which supports Aboriginal women, says there has to be an end to funding uncertainty. She says organisations are facing funding cliffs and have difficulty retaining staff as they try and help Indigenous women who are 8 times more likely to be victims of homicide. Advocates told the ABC next week's federal budget provides an opportunity for the government to follow through on their commitment to end violence against women. Their question is, will they take it? And you can get help by calling the National Sexual Assault, Domestic and Family Violence Counselling Service on 1800-RESPECT. Dedicated support for First Nations people is available from 13Yarn. The High Court has today upheld an appeal by the Northern Territory Sacred Sites Watchdog regarding construction work in the Kakadu National Park. The case concerned allegations a sacred men's site at Goonlam Falls had been violated after National Parks constructed a walking track in 2019 without getting a certificate from the Northern Territory Aboriginal Areas Protection Authority. In an earlier case in the NT Supreme Court, the Director of Parks successfully argued immunity from the Territory laws because it was a Commonwealth agency. But in today's judgment summary, the High Court ruled the Director of Federal National Parks can be held criminally responsible. 5 men have been caught illegally entering Australia on a small dinghy in far north Queensland. The men, reportedly from the West African nation of Senegal, are in custody on Saibai Island in the Torres Strait, about 4 kilometres from the Papua New Guinean mainland. PNG police say they travelled via Indonesia using fake travel documents before attempting the crossing. 2 PNG nationals are being questioned over their alleged involvement. At least 3 shops have been damaged in a fire which tore through a shopping centre in Melbourne's west. Firefighters were called to the blaze in Hoppers Crossing at about 3 a.m. The fire had already engulfed 1 shop and sent thick smoke through the centre. 2 neighbouring businesses also caught alight, causing major damage to the stores. Fire investigators say the fire is suspicious. The New South Wales Government has threatened to pull funding from some Western Sydney libraries after a council voted to remove same-sex parenting books from shelves. Reporter Jessica Rendell has more.
This was a rather heated council meeting last week where a slim majority of Cumberland City councillors voted to remove a book on same-sex parenting from its library shelves. 6 councillors voted for the motion and 5, including the Mayor, Lisa Lake, voted against it. This motion was brought forward by former Mayor, and Councillor Steve Christou, who argued that he had some parents approach him and said that they were distraught when they found this book in the toddler section of a library in the Cumberland City area. He also says that this book does not represent the values of his community and he's described them as religious and conservative. And we've got a clip from that very heated council meeting to play for you now. Take a listen.
This community is a very religious community. It is a very family-orientated community. Regardless of what their religion, whether they are Catholic, Orthodox, Islamic, Hindu, whatever their background, they all have the same beliefs. Family, religious values, and conservative. They don't want such controversial issues going against their beliefs indoctrinated into their libraries.
Jess, what's been the reaction to this move?
Well, Gemma, there's been anger, there's been disappointment, and many have come out strongly condemning this vote, including one of the councillors who voted against it, Diane Coleman. She called this a form of book burning and said that this is a sweet book and it's one that should be on library shelves as it allows children who do have same-sex parents to feel represented and to feel included in these spaces. We also know that Equality Australia has also commented on this issue, releasing a statement yesterday. Their legal director said, if you don't want to borrow the book, you don't have to, but don't deny others the chance to access books that reflect modern family life in Australia in 2024. The legal director also went on to say that councils banning LGBTQ+ books on its shelves should be illegal under the New South Wales Anti-Discrimination Act if it isn't already. Now, this vote will also have financial implications for the council. We're hearing that the state government is threatening to pull funding from the libraries in this council area as a consequence of this vote. New South Wales Arts Minister John Graham has said that it should be up to the reader to decide which books they read when they go into a library. So much debate about this topic, Gemma.
Jess Rendell in Sydney, thank you. In a further sign of a strained relationship between Prince Harry and the royal family, the Duke of Sussex won't see his father, King Charles, during a visit to Britain because the monarch will be too busy. Europe correspondent Catherine Diss filed this report from London.
Prince Harry is back on home soil for just a few days for the 10th anniversary of the Invictus Games, the international sporting event that he founded for military personnel wounded in action. We barely caught a glimpse of the Duke of Sussex today as he arrived at his first event, and it turns out that neither will his family. King Charles is too busy to catch up with his youngest son. His diary is full. There had been media speculation that the pair would meet up, but a spokesperson for the Duke of Sussex has confirmed that that won't be happening, and the Prince is said to be understanding of the King's diary commitments and has said that he hopes to see him soon. He's barely been in the United Kingdom since he and his wife Meghan stepped back from official royal duties in 2020 and moved to Los Angeles to raise their 2 children. Relations have been strained since and further deteriorated after the couple aired criticisms of the royal family in a Netflix series documentary, followed by an autobiography that the Prince wrote titled Spare. He's said to be barely speaking to his older brother, heir to the throne, Prince William. He last saw his father in February after his cancer diagnosis was made public.
It's time for the weather now. Here's Nick Byrne.
Most of the country is essentially getting the same weather today as what you had yesterday. Showers along the east coast, clear skies for most of the country. Well, at least dry skies. We've got some clouds streaming across. We'll watch that closely. In fact, there's a trough in the east that's about to start kicking up some action from later on tonight. For most of us, though, this high pressure system in the south, it's been...
Israel seizes the Rafah crossing between Egypt and the Gaza Strip, pushing on with an offensive despite hopes that a ceasefire deal had been near.
Ukraine security services rumble an assassination plot against top officials, including President Volodymyr Zelensky. It's alleged Russian agents had been planning attacks to coincide with Vladimir Putin's inauguration ceremony. And a small victory for Donald Trump as he gets one of his 4 criminal indictments against him indefinitely postponed. The news coming as all eyes were on a New York courtroom where the former porn star Stormy Daniels told all about their alleged sexual encounter. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom. I'm Alexander Orcott. A hospital in Gaza City in the north of the enclave has reported at least 7 people have been killed, many more wounded, in the latest Israeli airstrikes this morning. It said those killed were all members of the same family when the blast struck an apartment block. Airstrikes have been reported throughout the enclave in the early hours of Wednesday, including in Rafah, where Israeli forces earlier seized control of the crossing with Egypt. The UN is warning of the potential collapse of aid supplies to Palestinians from the closure of the 2 main crossing points at a time when officials say northern Gaza is experiencing a full-blown famine. Tom Canetti says Palestinians have gone through a rollercoaster of emotions.
Less than 24 hours after Palestinians celebrated what some believed was a deal reached between Israel and Hamas, the Israeli army pushes through with its operations in Rafah, where the UN estimates up to 1.5 million people are sheltering from the war. Israel's ground forces took control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing, which leads to Egypt, after crossing along the Philadelphia corridor, 14-kilometre strip of land serving as a buffer zone between the enclave and Egypt, guaranteed by the Israeli-Egyptian Peace Treaty of 1979.
I don't think Israel will approve the deal. Israel doesn't care about us or our children. Israel only cares about its own people, and Netanyahu only cares about being at the top. He doesn't care about the children.
As volatile ceasefire negotiations continue between the two sides, an Israeli government spokesperson said Hamas can end the conflict by surrendering.
This afternoon, before we here in Israel put our kids to bed, and the way it could end is quite simple. If Hamas lay down their arms and release our hostages, that is the way for this conflict to end. Hamas need to lay down their arms and give us back our hostages. That is the way for this conflict to end. Anything else where Hamas remains in power is simply not an option for Israel.
The Rafah crossing is strategically important because it is the main route for aid entering the enclave and the exit for those who are able to flee to Egypt.
Meanwhile, an Israeli delegation has arrived in Cairo to assess whether Hamas can be persuaded to shift its latest ceasefire offer. The Islamist militant group accepted a deal on Monday, but Israel rejected it, dampening hopes that a truce can be agreed on anytime soon. Cammy Knight talks us through the sticking points.
Hopes of an imminent ceasefire in Gaza have come and gone. Israel says the terms of Hamas's accepted proposal remain far from meeting its demands. The first sticking point involves the first phase of the deal. The text originally provided for the gradual release of 33 Israeli hostages, starting with women, children, the elderly and most vulnerable, over an initial period of 42 days. But Hamas's amended version specifies these hostages could be alive or dead. The other requirements involve the sufficient entry of humanitarian aid, relief materials and fuel. Military combat would cease for 10 hours a day, and Israel would have to at least partially remove its troops from the strip. In the second phase, as well as releasing more hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, both sides would agree to restore, quote, sustainable calm to Gaza. This is another sticking point, since Israel and Hamas have different views of what that would look like. For Hamas, it's the complete withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, something the Israeli government has long been opposed to as it vows to destroy Hamas. Phase 3 revolves around the reconstruction of Gaza and a total end to the blockade. Despite rejecting Hamas's deal, Israel has agreed to send a delegation to Egypt for further talks.
Ukraine security services say they foiled an assassination attempt against President Volodymyr Zelensky. He was one of several senior political figures in the crosshairs of Russian agents who were said to be planning top-level hits ahead of Vladimir Putin's inauguration ceremony this Tuesday.
Russian insiders, Ukraine's secret service, claims were plotting to kill Volodymyr Zelensky. Among those detained were 2 colonels from the Department of the State Protection of Ukraine, accused of divulging classified information to Russia.
The network, whose activities were overseen by the FSB from abroad, included 2 UDO colonels who leaked secret information to the Russian Federation. Thus, the enemy was actively developing plans to eliminate President Volodymyr Zelensky. One of the most important tasks of the FSB agent network was to find officials among the military close to the president who could take the head of state hostage and later kill him.
Targets they plan to assassinate also include the head of the SBU and the head of the GUR, Ukraine's military intelligence. According to the SBU, the operatives intended to monitor and relay the movements of their targets to enable precision rocket attacks on their locations, followed by drone strikes to eliminate survivors and erase any evidence of the operation.
After a first stop in France, Chinese President Xi Jinping is now in Serbia to continue his European tour, with a visit that coincides with the 25th anniversary of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade being bombed by NATO forces during the Kosovo War. In an op-ed in a local newspaper, she said the incident will never be forgotten. Also during the visit, the talks will focus on China's multi-billion euro investment in the country.
Landing in Belgrade late into the night, Xi Jinping was greeted by Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić before being treated to a traditional dance right on the tarmac. A red carpet welcome that highlighted the crucial partnership between Serbia and China. In Belgrade, the streets were adorned with Chinese flags ahead of Xi's arrival, as the capital seemed to brim with anticipation and even a sense of pride, with Serbia one of only 3 stops on the Chinese president's European tour.
We have friends all over the world, but China is a little bigger than the rest. We owe the president our respect. He stays for 2 days. It's a nice surprise that he chose to come here.
Serbia and China have in recent years forged a deep strategic partnership that's seen Beijing invest heavily in the Balkan country. China has lent Serbia billions of euros for infrastructure development and runs several mines and factories across the country. More trade deals and agreements are expected to be signed during Xi Jinping's visit, which could also serve to reinforce diplomatic ties. Serbia is among the EU's biggest backers of China's Belt and Road Initiative, and together with Hungary, one of the few European countries still sympathetic to Russia. Analysts have noted Xi's choice to visit these 2 nations as the rest of the bloc seeks to ramp up pressure on Beijing over its ties with Moscow.
Vladimir Putin has begun his latest 6-year term as president with an extravagant ceremony at the Grand Kremlin Palace. In a heavily choreographed performance as always, Putin was pictured in his office looking at papers before then walking along the Kremlin's long corridors towards the inauguration. From there, Catherine Killier-Clifford has the story.
A familiar red carpet walk for Russian President Vladimir Putin as a long and elaborate inauguration ceremony kicked off his latest 6-year term after almost a quarter of a century in power. Putin used the first moments of his new term to thank the soldiers fighting in his invasion of Ukraine.
I want to bow before our heroes, the participants of the special military operation. A low bow to all those who fight.
Putin won re-election last month by a record 87% in a tightly controlled election from which 2 anti-war candidates were barred, described as a sham by exiled opposition figures. The US, the UK, Canada and most EU nations boycotted the swearing-in by not sending their ambassadors. Putin now dominates Russian politics even more than he did at his last inauguration 6 years ago. Leading opposition figures are in prison or exile, and leading critic Alexei Navalny died in prison in February. His widow Yulia Navalnaya called on supporters to keep up the fight.
We must make sure that no one in the world believes Putin, either in Russia or outside its borders. It's difficult, but we have to try, and that means persistent, stubborn, daily work. Our country is now ruled by a liar, a thief, and a murderer.
In 2020, Putin made changes to the constitution which allow for him to stay in power until 2036.
This Tuesday, Donald Trump received the good news that his Florida trial over alleged mishandling of classified documents has been indefinitely postponed, though any joy will have been dampened as the presidential hopeful was sitting in a New York courtroom at the same time, just feet away from Stormy Daniels, as the former porn star spoke in graphic detail of the alleged sexual encounter the pair shared in 2006. Lauren Bostoker has more details on the most anticipated moment of the hush money trial.
It was the most anticipated testimony of Donald Trump's spectacular criminal trial. Stephanie Clifford, better known as Stormy Daniels, told jurors about her alleged sexual encounter with the former U.S. president. The adult film star said she first met Trump at a golf event in 2006, where he invited her to dinner and later to his penthouse. She said the sexual encounter that followed was brief, but left her shaking. Donald Trump, who was married at the time, denies having sex with Daniels, but in 2016 she was approached by his then lawyer Michael Cohen, who offered her $130,000 to keep the story quiet. The current case against Trump centers around this so-called hush money payment, which prosecutors say was a scheme to influence the presidential campaign. The former U.S. president is currently facing 34 felony charges, and his lawyer's attempt to push for a mistrial during Stormy Daniels' testimony was rejected by the judge. Yet as he left the courtroom on Tuesday, Trump remained defiant, calling the case a ploy to prevent him from hitting the campaign trail.
It's a disgrace. In the meantime, I'm stuck. I'm here. Instead of being in Georgia, we're not able to be there because we're stuck in this trial, which everyone knows is a hoax.
The case marks the first time a former U.S. president faces a criminal trial. But even if convicted, Trump would still be able to run against Joe Biden in November's presidential election.
Staying in the US, where TikTok and its Chinese parent company ByteDance have filed a lawsuit challenging a new law that would ban the hugely popular social media app in the US unless it's sold to an approved buyer. Lawmakers want the change due to fears that Chinese ownership poses a risk to national security due to the accumulation of people's data. The company, though, says this violates the US Constitution, specifically the First Amendment on free speech. And some sport in the Champions League has eluded the top French football team again, Paris Saint-Germain, losing 1-0 at home to Borussia Dortmund. The German side therefore winning 2-0 on aggregate, booking a place in the final. They'll face either the fellow German team Bayern Munich or Real Madrid, who play later this Wednesday. The loss was a bitter disappointment, especially for the PSG's star striker Kylian Mbappe, who leaves to Madrid following 7 seasons at PSG without a Champions League title.
It's sad because the guys tried to give it everything. We worked hard, we gave everything to try and make a difference, but we didn't succeed. We weren't efficient in the 6-yard box. In the Champions League, in decisive matches, when you're not clinical in front of goal, it's difficult to hope to go through to the next round, especially when it's a final.
Now for further analysis, here's our sports reporter James Facina, who was at the match.
Well, it wasn't to be for Paris Saint-Germain. Once again, PSG bow out of the Champions League, this time in another disappointing semi-final, unable to find the goal. Mats Hummels getting the one and only goal for Dortmund in this game, a header that put them 2-0 on aggregate, and enough for Dortmund to make it through to the final after defending extremely well, something that Paris was not able to do anyway on the pitch. Their attack tonight was poor once again, quite unlucky if we consider they hit the woodwork 6 times over the 2 legs of this semi-final, over in Dortmund and here at the Parc des Princes. But plenty of questions for PSG. What are things going to be looking like going forward for them? Kylian Mbappe, of course, who will be leaving. This was his last game at the Parc des Princes in the Champions League. He'll be leaving the club at the end of the season. But Dortmund, big credit to them. They got the job done once again, not taking in a single goal over these 2 games. They'll be facing either Real Madrid or Bayern Munich. Those 2 sides go head-to-head tomorrow for a place in the final at Wembley, where Dortmund will be hoping that they can perhaps win a 2nd trophy in the Champions League.
That's where we end this edition. Stay tuned for more world news on France 24.
Is Asia First.
Good Wednesday morning, it's 9 a.m. here in Singapore. I'm Julie Yu. Our top story this hour. The White House expresses hope that a ceasefire deal with Hamas is still within reach. It says Israel must reopen Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt, calling it unacceptable. But the UN warns of a potential collapse of the flow of aid from the closure of Rafah and Karim Shalom, the other key entry point into the Palestinian enclave that's already on the brink of famine.
two main arteries for getting aid into Gaza is currently choked off. Indeed, this morning is one of the darkest in this 7-month-long nightmare.
I'm Arnold Gay. Also this morning, TikTok and its Chinese parent ByteDance sued to block the US law that could force a nationwide ban of the short video app. The court challenge sets up a historic legal battle that will determine if security concerns about TikTok's links to China can trump the First Amendment rights of its 170 million American users. And voter turnout, a growing concern as the third phase of India's massive general election shows a similar fall in numbers as the first two phases. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is seeking a rare third straight term in the country, which experts say will be the third largest economy by the end of the decade.
The whole stack known as India Stack or digital public infrastructure has really unleashed a lot of transformation in the country, and all of this is resulting in significant business benefits, and the economy is doing quite well as well.
I'm Elizabeth Neal with your business news. Southeast Asia's third largest bank posts lower first quarter profit as lackluster lending weighs on UOB's latest report card. But gains in wealth and card fees help cushion a slight drop in lending income. But stocks in Asia scrambling for direction after Wall Street struggled to sustain some momentum as investors keep rate cut hopes alive. But differing opinions between Israel and Hamas are threatening a potential ceasefire deal as fresh negotiations reportedly get underway in Cairo.
Hamas says it's agreed to a Qatari-Egyptian ceasefire and hostage release proposal. The US is refuting that, saying Hamas did not accept the proposal but rather responded with several suggestions.
According to Israel, that proposal fell well below their essential requirements and was designed to undermine its entry into Rafah.
ישראל לא תאפשר לחמאס להחזיר את שלטון הרשע שלו ברצועה. ישראל לא תאפשר לו לשקם את יכולותיו הצבאיות כדי להמשיך לחתור להשמדתנו. ישראל לא יכולה לקבל הצעה שמסכנת את ביטחון אזרחינו ואת עתיד מדינתנו.
A Hamas official says the group has made enough concessions and warns that there will be no ceasefire deal if Israel's military aggression in Rafah continues. He adds that Israel's incursion into the southern Gaza city is an attempt to sabotage all the efforts of the mediators to achieve an agreement.
Hamas also says it has shown some flexibility with the proposals and made, quote, calculated concessions. According to Egyptian state-linked media, delegates from Qatar, Egypt, Hamas, and the US are back at the negotiating table. Reports say Israel will send mediators to Egypt to participate. The White House says both sides should be able to close the remaining gaps.
And as concerns mount over the fate of the more than 1.5 million Palestinians sheltering in Rafah, the Biden administration downplayed Israel's offensive there, but maintains it's still against a broader incursion that doesn't prioritize civilian safety.
This appears to be a limited operation, but of course much of that depends on what comes next. They have said, I think quite clearly, it's no secret that they want to conduct a major military operation there. We have made clear that we oppose such an operation.
The White House says Israel's closure of the border crossings into Gaza is unacceptable, adding that Karim Shalom is expected to reopen today.
We need to upsurge the humanitarian aid. This is why the hostage deal is so important. It would lead to a ceasefire, would lead to making sure hostages, including American hostages, come home and get that more humanitarian aid into Gaza.
The United Nations has called on Israel to immediately reopen crossings into Gaza after the IDF seized the Palestinian side of the Rafah crossing.
It warns that already scarce supplies will be further depleted in the enclave that is on the brink of famine. Observers say Israel's latest move could signal the start of a ground offensive into the southern city. Israel's allies have for weeks called for it to hold off from a big offensive.
And more than 1 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah amid poor conditions with little shelter, food, or medicine. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has appealed to Israel to not worsen these shortages.
Also remind Israel of its obligation to facilitate the safe and unimpeded access of humanitarian aid and staff into and across Gaza. Even the best friends of Israel are clear. An assault on Rafah would be a strategic mistake, a political calamity, and a humanitarian nightmare. I appeal to all those with influence over Israel to do everything in their power to help avert even more tragedy.
Other aid groups have also warned the Rafah border closure will worsen the healthcare crisis in Gaza. The crossing was the only exit point for those needing to leave Gaza for medical treatment. Well, earlier we spoke with Ian Lustig, Professor Emeritus at the University of Pennsylvania, and he explained what Israel might be trying to accomplish by seizing control of the Gaza side of the Rafah crossing.
It can act as if it controls the Gaza Strip by controlling that. But now I hear that Israel is accepting an American proposal that an American company will handle the transfers at that point. But when you ask, is this all bargaining and posture? I think that Israel's move into Rafah is an attempt to bolster the argument that Netanyahu has been making that the Israeli IDF military force is what will bring the hostages home. So if he can have a successful operation, a visible IDF operation right before the hostages come home, it's a way for him to bolster that argument because he's under tremendous pressure at home. His image is someone who cares more about his political future than he does about the hostages. So I think there's an element of theater about this terrible attack. But it's also true that Hamas's attack on Israeli soldiers right at the end is also a kind of theater. And that's both sides are out to move to a ceasefire in a way that allows them to tell the story of it that will benefit their leadership.
Professor, Israel seems to be betting that the military can do enough physical damage to Hamas to win security for itself by attacking Rafah, whereas Hamas seems to be betting that it can evade Israel's best efforts to crush it. Who's right here?
Well, I'm not so sure that Israel is right now trying to damage
Hamas militarily. Hamas has what they say are 4 units, 4 battalions in Rafah, and the current operation does not look like it's targeted at actually destroying them, but rather doing something, controlling, grabbing the crossing, moving tanks in. And there's a very visible operation, but which does not risk large numbers of Israeli soldiers. The only way Israel can fight in Rafah to destroy those battalions and follow American strictures not to kill large numbers of civilians is to move their troops down into the tunnels and fight Hamas down there rather than bombing. And that will result in very heavy Israeli casualties, which is a main reason why I think that kind of fighting has not occurred, and I hope that it will not occur.
Well, TikTok is taking on the U.S. government.
The popular video sharing platform and its Chinese parent company ByteDance are suing to block a law that would force the app to be sold or face a ban. They argue the legislation is unconstitutional.
The law was signed by President Joe Biden last month after passing in the U.S. Congress. It was mainly a $95 billion package of foreign aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, but it also included a provision to force ByteDance to sell TikTok within 9 months or be banned in the U.S. over national security concerns.
While TikTok CEO Shou Chu vowed the app was not going anywhere and will keep fighting in the courts. ByteDance has said it has no plans to sell TikTok.
U.S. lawmakers fear that China could use TikTok to spy on 170 million users in America, the app's biggest market. The TikTok has repeatedly denied sharing U.S. user data. The lawsuit was filed in the Washington federal court, and TikTok called the new law an extraordinary and unconstitutional assertion of power.
It claims the legislation unfairly singles out TikTok but puts all media at risk of a nationwide ban.
It argues that the law violated the First Amendment by curtailing massive amounts of protected speech.
It also says the sale of TikTok being demanded is not possible commercially, technologically, and legally on the time frame given. Therefore, there is no question the act will force a shutdown by January the 19th.
Kay Fisher tells us what's expected next in the lawsuit.
Well, this is all set to play out in the courts over the next few months. The case is expected to reach the Supreme Court, in fact, and that's because this is the first time that TikTok has filed a lawsuit in the US Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, and that's the main venue for appeals of constitutional law. It's a high-level appeals court, and it's designated as the exclusive jurisdiction for any challenges, meaning that a loss for TikTok could then only be overturned by the Supreme Court. So these are high stakes, and TikTok has asked this DC court to issue a declaratory judgment saying that the law violated the Constitution. Now, that's to issue an order that would stop Attorney General Merrick Garland from enforcing it, but the US government yet to respond to this, and a spokesperson for the Department of Justice declined to comment on any potential litigation, so we're still waiting for that response. TikTok has sued the US and won in the past, for example when President Trump also tried to ban it or force a sale in 2020 with an executive order on similar concerns, and then the courts blocked the Commerce Department from carrying out that, saying it overstepped legal bounds. And in other cases in states, a federal judge in Pennsylvania sided with TikTok later that year over the administration, and then a third federal judge in the state of Montana last year said that the state's TikTok ban violates the Constitution in more ways than one.
The Chinese President Xi Jinping has taken a swipe at NATO on the final day of his state visit to France. In an article published in the Serbian daily Politica, Mr. Xi slammed the security alliance for its, quote, flagrant bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, on this day in 1999, and warned that Beijing will never allow such tragic history to repeat itself. The Chinese leader arrived in Serbia earlier today, was greeted by Serbian counterpart Aleksandar Vučić. Now, the nation is China's most important partner in the Balkans. President Xi will be in Serbia for 2 days before heading to Hungary next.
The Chinese president capped off his trip to France yesterday with a visit to the Pyrenees. He was hosted by his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron. Both leaders discussed a range of topics, including bilateral trade and the Ukraine war during their talks earlier in the week. CNA's Tan Chu-Yi has more.
这是我要送你的一些补充，这是这个中国翻译的法国的小说，这是中文的法国小说。
A French culture enthusiast, as Chinese state media would call it, President Xi Jinping gifted the Chinese translations of several classic French novels to his French host, including 93 by Victor Hugo, all part of what analysts called a charm offensive in Europe. But behind closed doors on Monday, Mr. Xi, flanked by close confidant Cai Qi and longtime Foreign Minister Wang Yi, told his French and European counterparts that there is no such thing as China's overcapacity problem, whether it's viewed from the perspective of comparative advantage or global market demand, according to Chinese state media. During his three-way talks with French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, without naming names, Mr. Xi also said China-EU relations should not be dependent on or dictated by any third party. Despite the firm language, analysts said it's hard to miss what the Chinese leader was aiming to achieve with his first trip to Europe in 5 years. That's especially when putting side by side the performance in Paris and his recent meetings with other European and American leaders.
But Xi, in particular, in his visit, has brought a carrots approach. So he's offering greater market access to France in particular, but more broadly to the EU countries. He's clearly trying to entice the EU to be more engaging on trade, as Chancellor Scholz was in his visit to China last month, where he was talking about a pro-free trade, pro-engagement policy, which is music to the ears of Beijing and sounds very different than the signals you get coming out of Washington these days, particularly Secretary Yellen's visit last month to Beijing, where she was talking about overcapacity, and that was at the very top of the US agenda vis-a-vis China.
Meanwhile, both Mr. Macron and Ms. von der Leyen pledged to defend Europe's strategic interests in its economic relations with China.
I am convinced that if the competition is fair, we in Europe will have thriving, durable economies that will support more good jobs. But of course, today we also discuss the imbalances that remain significant. And this is a matter of great concern.
Back home in China, Mr. Xi's trip, which marks the 60th anniversary of China-France ties and ahead of the 50th anniversary of China-EU relations, received blow-by-blow live coverage on domestic media. Projecting himself as a world leader who's able to handle China's relations with major countries, the Chinese leader said he supports Mr. Macron's idea of a truce in all conflicts, including Ukraine, during the Paris Olympics this summer.
作为联合国安理会常任理事国和负责任大国，中国愿同法方一道，以巴黎奥运会为契机，倡议运动会期间全球停火止战。
As part of his 5-day tour in Europe, President Xi will also pay state visits to Serbia and Hungary.
Still ahead, Southeast Asia's third largest bank posts lower first quarter profit as lackluster lending weighs on Gobi's latest report.
As Kenya's flooding crisis continues, the government evicts people living in informal settlements along Nairobi's rivers. A soldier shoots tear gas into the air as Kenya's government continues its forceful eviction of people living in most of the informal settlements in Nairobi that are next to rivers. Last Tuesday, President William Ruto ordered the evacuation of all homes along the nation's waterways. The announcement came a day after a torrent of water swept away scores of people in an area some 50 kilometers east of the capital. Tensions were high in this area, with residents saying they were caught unawares, despite the 48-hour directive to move lapsing 5 days ago. Ruto, we voted for you because you said you'd safeguard the poor. Now are you helping the poor or finishing them off? You plan to finish poor people, then just bomb us all and get it done with. You're finishing us, Ruto, and you claim to be a man of God. The anguish palpable. As excavators and bulldozers pull down homes, some residents watch helplessly, while others tried to grab iron sheets, timber, and anything of value. Now what are we going to do? We love our president, and that is why we supported him. He should come to our aid, because here we had no problem moving. We ask for urgent help to resettle people here who have nowhere to stay, and nothing. One of many people saying they feel Ruto's government has failed them.
Students at this school in Kenya have decided to take matters into their own hands. Armed with gardening hose, they are planting over 100 bamboo seedlings in the hope that the plants will filter the polluted air. Situated east of Nairobi, the school is right next to the country's largest dump site, and acrid fumes from the waste have been affecting their health.
The dump site produces gas in the morning and also in the afternoon. Seeing is becoming a problem in the morning. They produce mist, they produce fogs, which really pollutes the environment, produces bad smells. But some of the challenges that really affect us is the smell coming out from the dump site, the smoke, burning of those elements in there really produces smokes that also triggers asthma. Asthma is a disease that is commonly known in the secondary school.
When a new principal arrived last year, he knew he had to do something when cases of respiratory illnesses started increasing among students and teachers. The school relies on donations but is determined to keep going until the entire wall separating it from the dump site is covered.
My motivation of initiating bamboo project in the school was to mitigate the effects of dump site. It really pollute the air that we breathe, and with that I know it is going to reduce the cases of respiratory infections amongst the people in the Dora community.
Bamboo is the fastest growing plant on earth and is seen as one of nature's finest air purifier, but it also absorbs twice as much carbon dioxide as trees and generates an impressive amount of oxygen.
Planting bamboo trees ensures that there is a barrier that is provided in terms of the air that is polluted coming through, especially when you look at the fine particles. As well as, of course, the bamboo being a plant ensures that there is photosynthesis, and in photosynthesis ensures that it's producing oxygen, whereas also intaking carbon dioxide.
Out of the 166 days during which the UN monitored air pollution in Dandora last year, only 12 of them met its air quality conditions. An industrial eco-park in Egypt is up and running. Located in Shakya province, the industrial park started operations last week. The Egyptian government and Chinese electronics giant Haier laid the foundation for the project in March last year, aiming to boost local manufacturing and create about 2,000 jobs. The project is built over an area of 200,000 square meters, over 2 phases, with a total of $135 million in foreign direct investment. The phase we are in today is the manufacturing of 2 models of washing machines, front load and top load, as well as televisions and air conditioners. Haier Group says its made-in-Egypt appliances will target markets in Africa, the Middle East and Europe. The percentage of local components here varies between 40% and 65%. We are targeting the local market with 70% of the production, while 30% is for exports. The manufacturing capacity of this phase is 1 million units annually, and the capacity for the whole project will hopefully reach 1.5 million units annually. The park is celebrated for its energy efficiency, recycling of wastewater, and efficient electricity usage. We use Chinese technology in different products across all manufacturing processes here in the factory. We have very high-end technology such as the eco-friendly cooling towers and eco-friendly boilers, and there are no heat emissions for anything that could harm the environment. China is one of Egypt's largest trading partners.
Jeff Bennett is on assignment. On the NewsHour tonight, Israel seizes control of a Gaza border crossing as a ceasefire and hostage deal.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.